So I'm here with Rui Madeira. Rui graduated as a Master of Computer Engineering with a very high grade score in 2016, before going on to do work as a business intelligence analyst, then as a software engineer for the European Space Agency and Edisoft, and is now here at Valispace as a front-end developer. So Rui, my first question to you is, which is more difficult, to be a front-end or a back-end developer?
That is a very interesting question.
The age-old question.
The age-old question, especially nowadays. To be honest, I think it depends on each person, what is easiest. I think there are moments where back-end is most difficult, moments where the front-end is most difficult. I think overall they have very different challenges, let's say. And I think some people like solving one challenge or another challenge. And from my side, what I can say is I actually like both, although I'm having most fun mostly in the front end. I think both have some difficult challenges, and I don't want to get anyone upset by saying one is more difficult than the other, basically.
Yeah, that's a very diplomatic answer. But I think something that you've mentioned there touches on the fact that there needs to be seamless communication between the front end and the back end. Mm-hmm. So here at Valispace, maybe describe what those challenges are, or how you effectively communicate between front end and back end.
Yeah, I think mostly nowadays we are talking about web technologies, so it's mostly about like the way they communicate between each other is through HTTP requests usually, or in our case also WebSockets. And usually what these have is like a specific request done by the front end with a specific format, and the backend will reply on a certain way. And basically the way we do this is to firsthand, when we start developing a feature or even before, to agree on what would be the answer and what is the question and what is the answer from both sides. And for example, in Valispace, what we do, which is quite common nowadays, is to use something like Swagger UI that is a representation, let's say, of the points, which we call endpoints, where you can talk to the backend, let's say, and get information from it. So we have several types of objects in Valispace, so each one in the backend is mapped to certain endpoints that you can reach out and get information from it. And the way that you ask for the information and the way it arrives to you is always in a certain format that you can consult, for example, in this documentation that we have that is a representation of the backend. So once this is set up, it's mostly straightforward for the front end to know how the data will arrive to it. And also, this also helps from the backend side for the backend developer to know like to which point does he need to arrive so that they can communicate between each other. So this is mostly it. A lot of back and forth also in discussions. We are still not a very, very big team, so we can still have some direct one-to-ones between front-end developers and back-end. But in any case, then what is final is this type of format, this type of reply answer that we will use.
So for the front end and the back end to communicate nicely within the software, then the front end developers and the back end developers also have to have a nice communication.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if they have a nice communication, it's even better. But as I was saying, because before we start developing each part more or less separately, we have to agree more or less on this structure of data that the front end, for example, will receive and will use. So once that is more or less set, you of course still need communication because some details arise and this is normal, but you can more or less go to develop each part almost independently. So as long as they fulfill that contract, let's say.
No. Maybe you can give me a specific example of what some of these requests are and how they're then communicated through the front and back end.
The classic requests. I mean, in Valispace, a lot of our screens are about data grids and showing data and the connections between these types of data. And well, the classic request that needs to be done is when the user enters the page, you need to have data to be able to show it. For example, we have a module which is called the requirements module, which represent, let's say, the requirements of a certain thing that our customers are building. Can be a car, can be a satellite. And so once the user arrives to that model, what we need to show is, for example, the requirements that he's been working on now. And at the same time, like each requirement has another related type of object, which is, for example, the verification methods, which say how to verify that this requirement is being fulfilled. So you already seen that we need two types of data, and we need to connect them in the front end and show them in a way that makes sense for the user. So for this, for example, the most simple request is the front end will say, okay, give me all requirements, or give me all requirements of this project, or give me all requirements of this folder of requirements, let's say. And so the backend needs to reply, in this case it's a list, so it needs to reply with a list. And in this list, it's each type of object that represents a requirement that fulfills that. And then the front end will do the same thing for the other type of data, in this case verification methods. We'll also have the list, and then the front end once has these two things. So it's two lists of objects, can connect between each other because they have relationships between them, like IDs, for example, to connect them. Mm-hmm. So this is one example of request, which in this case has filters like projects or folders. Yeah, this is the simplest one that we have as soon as you enter. Yeah.
That's the simplest one.
Exactly.
Okay. So you've done previous front-end work in the past.
Mm-hmm.
How would you say that being a front-end developer at Valispace differs from, let's say, more traditional software building?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one thing that is usually comes up. Well, there are a lot of challenges related with the type of things that we do. For example, since we are working with properties of different types of objects like cars, satellites, we have to work with complicated mathematical things. We have to work with complicated text things. But I think the most interesting one, at least for me, besides the tables that I also talked about, is also the feeling of collaboration that we intend to give in the tool. So we say that we are a live collaboration tool. And what this means is that if we have two instances of Valispace open, either in two devices or in two tabs, or even, yeah, I mean.
And do you mean two instances on a user's same computer, or different browsers, different devices?
Different browsers, different devices, for example. When we have these two, we want to continue having this feel of collaboration, in live collaboration. So we want always what the user is seeing to be the most up-to-date thing. And this is not only what I was describing before, for example, the tables, is also in the tree that we have that shows like different objects in a tree, or in a button that is red because something is going on. So we want all of this to be seamless and to be, regardless if the user is on a tablet or a phone or in a different browser, it needs to be seamless. And this is not something that is, it should be simple, but it's not something that is so simple nowadays. I remember some apps like YouTube, or even, I remember like editing two playlists in YouTube, or one playlist in two different tabs. I do one thing in one tab, in the other one I need to refresh again. So it's something that should be simple, but it's not so simple. And in Valispace, we strive to achieve that.
So tell me how that looks today then, literally. So imagine you talked about it trying to be, when you're working collaboratively, trying to get the most up to date. Mm-hmm. Does that mean that if I'm working and my colleague is on another computer, am I seeing them type?
Not already.
So it's not like Figma or something?
Not already. We did in the past some proof of concepts, if we could do that, and we are actually not that far away. Wow. But it's not as easy as that. So one of the challenges we still have to solve is precisely in the text. So it's not, for example, Google Docs that you are seeing the other person write. So in the text fields, we still don't have this at the same time. But for example, what we have, which is also common, for example, in Google Sheets, is like if you're editing a cell there, and another colleague of you is working on the same tab, let's say, and is editing a cell, you immediately see that. And in Valispace is the same. If you're editing a table cell, and another colleague of you is working on the same cell, you will immediately see it.
But so you see that they're working on that cell rather than the specific changes that's happening there.
You see the change. No, you see once he hits the enter, you see immediately the change that he did on your side.
And when you say immediate, how immediate are we talking?
We are talking when everything goes well. We are talking a matter of seconds, let's say, or even less. Hopefully, even less.
When things go bad?
When things go bad, it can be some more seconds, let's say, usually. When we miss some things in either the front end or the back end, we might need to refresh the browser. Sometimes it happens.
So is that usually the fix?
Depends on the case. But sometimes we might have forgotten to listen to a certain thing in the front end, and it's not refreshed immediately, so you doesn't see the consequence. But one interesting thing about Valispace is that regardless if it's a table, you can be seeing like the same object can be displayed on a table, but maybe you have another sidebar or you have another component where the same object is being displayed in a different way. And what is interesting is that if a person changes something from that object, it will see the change in both things, even if it's in another device or in another tab.
Ah, wow. And is that a challenge itself?
That is a challenge itself, yes.
Because it sounds simple in a way.
Exactly, it sounds simple, but it's not so simple because everything that you do in the front end, you need to take this into account. You need to think that you are displaying some data, but anytime you can receive a message. So the way that we do this is with WebSockets. That is more or less like a two-way communication that is open between the front end and the back end, so the server. And this two-way communication allows for, without any request from the front end, to the back end send a message to say, hey, look, there is new data for this object. And when the front end listens to that, he has the possibility to say, okay, then let me refresh this or let me calculate this again.
But the refresh happens without a physical refresh.
Exactly. When I say refresh, it's that part of the UI, not the button of the browser, the refresh.
And then you also just mentioned in that answer the fact that that this collaboration can happen between devices. Okay, so one engineer might be working within a tablet, the other might be working on whichever other device. Does that make it difficult?
No, that part is more or less the same, because this technology I was referring to, so the WebSockets, is based on browser technology of nowadays, like the modern browsers, and so it's basically, it also works. For example, for the tablet, is the same technology basically. So if you have the browser open in a different browser, in a different device, different browser, it's still the same technology. So the same.
So in a way, then, do you think that this move from a lot of software companies to build browser-based pieces of software, do you think that makes it an easier challenge for front-end developers, or does it make it different in any way?
Yeah, so in my opinion, so in terms of front-end, I don't have a lot of experience besides the web-based technologies, let's say. I did some things with native technologies, let's say, but mostly it was web-based. And in my opinion, I think it's a benefit because basically it narrows down let's say the possibilities that you have in terms of technologies, because you have several types of browsers, but most of them are based on the same core. Let's say, for example, Google Chrome, and now the new Edge.
Not Internet Explorer.
Not Internet Explorer.
That's dead.
Yeah, but it's based on the same Chromium engine, which is the engine behind these two. So they have the same bugs will appear in both, but also the same features. Firefox is a bit different, is a different engine, but is already supporting the same thing. And also you have something called the web standards, which is like standards that these browsers need to follow, let's say. And once something is a standard and is implemented in the browsers, then you can more or less rely on it. So even though there are still nowadays differences between, for example, browsers or even devices, I think is a benefit because you know more or less at least a set of things that will work or should work as expected.
Yeah, and it makes it standardized, right? Which and I guess which in a way means that you're not having to come up with multiple different things for multiple different formats or operating systems.
Yeah, exactly.
You mentioned WebSockets, okay, and I'm interested to know whether that was something that was already here at Valispace before you came in, or whether it's something that you had had a hand in bringing on.
No. This was already here in Valispace when I arrived. It's something that is, in my opinion, quite amazing. Makes a lot of sense because, as I said, in Valispace we have a lot of type of objects, and they are very interlinked. Let's say, so this is something that allows this reactivity that I was describing in a very easy, let's say, in a very easy way without a lot of overheads. So by exchanging these messages, you guarantee that if everything goes well, you have everything updated. There are other ways of doing this, which I already worked on in the past. For example, you mentioned I worked in Edisoft. In Edisoft, I was working in a air traffic control app, and we also had this need for reactivity. So, for example, to know what is the location of each airplane, these type of things. And the way we did this was a bit different than in Valispace, which was every X seconds we would pull the backend to get all the positions, for example, which also works. Might not be, or might be, depending on the use case, a more effective approach or not. In the case of Valispace, since the moments where the data change are very specific, and we can more or less know it's either because a user typed something or a calculation finished or these type of things, it makes sense to have this type of technology where you can just send a message to the front end saying, hey, look, this changed, let's calculate it again or something.
Sounds good.
Yeah, so it's quite cool.
Just one more question about the collaborative features of Valispace and how this works with the front end. Are there any pieces within this collaborative feature that at the moment aren't so reactive or aren't so fast, or that you're having challenges with? And if so, maybe you can explain them.
Yeah, I think the most interesting one, it's the one that you were that you were asking, which is, for example, the text. Basically, right now we have some fields which we call the rich text fields, which are fields that have in a lot of apps. For example, Slack, that you can have bullets in what you're describing, or you can have headings in some apps, or you can have text of a different color. So we also have that in Valispace. We have fields where you can put text with bullets, different colors, all this. And these type of text these type of fields are a bit pervasive, let's say. So it can be inside a table cell, or it can be in another component, let's say, of the front end. If this is changed, you will see the collaboration, because if this is changed, you will receive immediately that it changed.
So any change, even if it's changing the color of font?
Exactly. What we don't have, that is what is coming, is that if it's related with this field, you cannot see immediately, like if there was like one character more, but the user still hasn't submitted to the server that, you cannot see at the same time that he has the cursor there and is doing one more character. So this is something that we already in the past, in Valispace, we have what we call the kind of hackathon weeks, let's say, where we, for a couple of days, we try to solve a challenge or try to do something completely different to try to improve something in Valispace. And a couple of, 1.5 years ago, something like that, we did one where we tried to tackle this. So in the text field, we did what you were hinting at, which is to see multiple cursors of multiple people. So we know it's possible, we know how to arrive there. For now, we still haven't tackled it. It has some tricky things still, But for example, that is one that is still not there, let's say.
But I guess maybe the question as well is how essential that feature is for the end user at this moment in time, right? And I guess maybe everything's a trade-off within this perspective when you're building a product.
Exactly.
Interesting about the hackathon weeks. Describe them to me, and are they effective?
Yeah, I think. Well, I personally quite enjoy them.
Is this an approach that other software companies have?
In my experience, in the previous one I was working, so the one you mentioned, Edisoft, we also used to do it. We basically had like every more or less 3 to 4 months taking a week to explore different things. So I already had some experience with that. And in Valispace, we also do it. For now, we still don't have a very, very rigorous schedule when it happened. But yeah, we do it. And the way to do it is a bit free form. That is like the developers kind of gather to think about what can be cool, either for Valispace itself as an app, as a company, or for something related to our environment, for example, space or other type of things. And usually you give a lot of liberty, so you give liberty to choose a team. No, so if a developer has an idea, gathers with 3 more and creates something. And the last one that we did, for example, my team, we did an app, like a mobile app, and
a Valispace version.
It was data from Valispace, but a completely different app.
Okay.
So it was not the Valispace app that we work on every day. It was a different one. We heard rumors that this could be something that the users would like to have, for example. And it was interesting because I suggested the idea based on some feedback from other teams that talked with the clients and knew that this could be cool. And once I suggested the idea, I had some people that say, yeah, okay, that is a good idea. I would like to try. Also because of the technologies, was something that I never did. Mobile app, also some colleagues of mine. And once we gathered this, it was interesting because we had some days to give this free form, and we did everything from like more or less prototype or more or less like boxes and screens of what would be the app, and then the app itself, and in a iterative approach. So it was quite fun. I think you have a lot of liberty to, not only in terms of technologies, but like if you want to work with a specific technology, for sure, there is something that you can bring to Valispace using that or exploring that. Yeah.
Describe to me what these hackathons actually look like or feel like. I mean, are you in the same room? Are you doing it remotely? Is there specific times? Is it intense?
Yeah, so I think, after COVID now, I think it's not anymore like in the same room. Of course, it would be nice, but nowadays people have a different routine, so it's difficult to have them all gather in the same room. So this was basically remote. I think some of my colleagues we were together in the office, but the other half was remote. So it was basically remote with a channel open all day. So in our case, we have Gather, could also be Slack, but we have the microphone open all day, let's say. And we are working together, seeing the changes almost immediately that each one does, and giving opinion to each other, basically. So it's intense. Some good pressure, let's say, to have something interesting to show at the end of the time, but mostly fun. Actually, to be honest, mostly fun, not like cutthroat environment.
Yeah, and it seems like maybe something productive might come out at the end of it, in a less pressured kind of way.
Yeah,
I like it. So you joined Valispace in 2020, and at the time of filming, that's around 2 years ago.
Almost, yeah.
Yeah, almost. So can you think about maybe the kind of thing, or what the biggest impacts, the kind of things you've brought in to this programming community has been?
You mean to more or less the company, the colleagues and all this?
I mean more from a programmer perspective, and from the software and from the front end.
In terms of features and
features, exactly.
Yeah, in terms of one thing that from the feedback I had, one thing that I think it was quite good. That is not a feature, but thinking on the programmer wise, I think it was like a bit of more rigorous, let's say, some more rigor. For example, in terms of coding standards that we are now following and trying to reach even higher. So there is some things called linters in the coding world, let's say, or the software engineering world, which is basically a program that looks at your code and say, hey, this might not be a good idea, or hey, this is probably a mistake, or something like this. And for example, when I arrived, we didn't have like a proper linting system in the front end, or this kind of steps, let's say. And this is something that I implemented, also along with some unit tests that still need to be worked upon, but it's something that I also did. And that I think, in my opinion, and from the feedback I had, is one step to increase like the rigor, let's say, of the code that we submit and that we work in the day-to-day, which also keeps us pushing for other level, let's say.
It's interesting that you say that, because I had a conversation with Joao, who's the head of DevOps, as you know, and one thing that he kept reiterating was how much of process he brought in, and the need to test. And I guess that's from when you going from a startup with a few developers, where maybe the need for rigor and the need for super solid code isn't as important as creating an MVP originally.
Exactly.
But then maybe as the programming base grows, and then so does the code base, maybe that's really essential to have this rigorous process. Exactly.
Yeah, it's precisely that. And I think this is normal, no? Because the people that are there already, they went to this phase and they know what is important in that phase. You need to show that you can do the product. But once you have more or less stable product, then, as you said, you need to increase a bit this rigor, because you will be more people in the team. You will have a lot more features. You'll have a lot more things to manage, let's say. And and this will be increasingly difficult. And when I arrived, João was also like agreeing with me on this and on this transition, and we collaborated really well on that part. I worked a bit on the linter and what should be done, and he took care of automating it so that the developers have the.
So you felt like there was a transition then? You felt like that you went from a place of, let's say, chaos to somewhere more ordered?
Exactly. And and there were some people already hinting that this transition needed to happen, and that would be a good thing. And yeah.
Do you think that if startup companies, as they move to scale up and beyond, if they don't implement processes and rigor, as I think that's a good word to call this, do you think then there's a potential for catastrophe? Do you think there's a potential for software failure?
Yeah, I think so. Because it's like the lines of code, they grow like really exponentially, and if you don't have like a logic to it, or you don't have like some standards to it, it can grow out of hand, and you lose track of even the complexity that you have to manage. You lose track of the performance. You might be losing performance of part of the app. You don't know why. And not only that, but you also lose a bit on knowledge sharing, because code is not only the code that is executing. Code is also knowledge that the person who wrote that code needed to have that knowledge to put that into code. And if there is new persons arriving and they just look at that, they might not understand why it was done like this. So it's not only about code, but it's also sharing the knowledge to that people, so that when they are maintaining that code or they are creating new codes, they also have the same knowledge, and they can do something even better that it was already there. So all of these things without standards and without some base, let's say, even if then some teams adopt some different practices, and I think you still have some leverage there, that some team can do things differently. But I think you need a basis for everything to fit and to not grow without.
From my naive perspective, it seems, from coming into a technology company and speaking to programmers like you, it seems that a lot of the things to do with good practices within programming are all about future-proofing. It's all about preventing either, as you say, knowledge transfer not being able to happen further down the line, or preventing messiness. And I think this seems to be that to be a good programmer, you need to have foresight.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, in the end, like after some experience, you already know what is going to happen. You already know that, okay, maybe some months from now, somebody will ask, hey, this was cool, but what if we do this?
So maybe you need to be burnt once already to then stop doing it in the future.
Yeah, you need some experience to know that some things will be coming eventually, and what happens when you have like a very big software that doesn't have this standard. But yeah.
Okay, let's talk more about the software, because often when we're in our weekly meetings and you're talking, I often hear you talk about tables.
Yeah, it's quite common.
So tell me what tables mean for Valispace specifically, and why it's so important for our software.
Yeah, so as I said before, like our software has a lot to do with data from our customers, different types of data, and this data is usually relational in the sense that if you have an object, it's probably linked to another object in some way. One of the easiest or practical ways of showing this is through a table, where, for example, each line is one of these objects, and then each column is one property of that object, or is a calculated property of that object related with another one. So because of this, a lot of screens, let's say, a lot of pages of our app usually have a table that is displaying either one or more of these types of objects. And yeah, you were asking before, like one of my contributions in terms of features to Valispace. I think one of the most interesting and also challenging one was a transition that I participated and helped with. So when I arrived, we were using Angular material, which is, let's say, a component library, which also has a table. Is a bit limited, and we are already pushing the most out of it.
And why was it limited?
So it has some limitations, both in terms of how you can customize it and display things in them, because I was saying like that is relational, which means that you can have an object here, and then one of the cells is completely different object, or is a property of another different object, which means that the cell can have things like images, can have formulas, which are, for example, if people know like LaTeX, the kind of image, like the kind of math output, so it's completely different than a normal like letters. We can have a lot of things there. We can have the text, the rich text that we were talking about before. So it can be a very difficult cell to display, like, and the data to get there can be difficult. So this table had these limitations. Another limitation, for example, is that so you can imagine already that for some customers like Airbus, the number of objects that they have for this is like, it's huge, can be 10,000s, 100,000s. And we have the need more or less to display it in one of these tables. And this is a performance limitation that some of these components will eventually hit. So it was also a reason for us to improve on that. And the way we did it is to use some commercial, like off-the-shelf software that we integrated, let's say, which is still a coding library, but is an interesting one called AGGrid, which, of course, it doesn't mean that we simply integrated this and that the work was done. No, this was a lot of work, especially the migration between the old tables with all this complexity that I'm mentioning into the new ones. Mm-hmm. And this was a very cool challenge because we had to do this migration. We had to make sure that we supported both things at the same time, because maybe some things were not migrated already and some customers still needed it. Maybe some customers were used to doing things like that and they needed a transition phase. So we needed to support the two things at the same time. And basically the complexity of it was quite big.
Talk to me about the process of, so you, in a way you're saying that this idea to get AGGrid and to use it was yours and your solution.
No, it was not mine.
But the solution of using it was yours?
Of using it?
Yeah, of using the AG Good library and into Valispace. This was your...
No, it was not. It was not mine. I said like one of the contributions was working on this
I see.
and helping on this and.
So, but talk to me about that process of. So you clearly there was something that you were using that wasn't fit for purpose, and you could see the issues with it. So then you were maybe, or whoever was involved in finding the solution. What does that process look like, and who's involved in this?
Yeah. So in this case, a lot came from our CTO, so Nelson, and the process, how it looks like, it has to be some kind of, how do you say, like a revision, not a revision, I'm missing some word, but like an analysis of what is possible, like what other things are. We already knew the limitations of what we had. We already knew what we could, what is on the market or even is in open source. I was mentioning the off-the-shelf because
you knew what was there already.
We knew some things, so we knew because some things are very common, and nowadays it's very common to have this type of open source libraries that you can integrate. So it was so let's say we always start with a proof of concept, let's say. So basically we cannot just say, okay, this is the library that we will choose. We will completely shape the system, let's go. No, usually how it looks like is that you see more or less what you have to do, like what you have to transfer. You try to, as quick as possible, see that the library that you will use or the tool that you will use fulfills like most of the things that you know you'll need. But then even with that, you will try to do it like quickly, to try to map it out. Okay, let me see how this feels. Let me start with this tool. Let me do this transition of a small part of the system. Okay, does it look good? Okay, performance. So you try to do a small proof of concept, seeing that most of the use cases that you will need, they are fulfilled, and try to map out how it would look like. And then it's a lot of work. Once a decision has been done on this, it's a lot of work, like every day. In this case, it was very interesting because it was the full front-end team working. Mm-hmm. So every front-end developer was working on this.
And how many of you work on the front-end?
So at the time and still today, we are 4. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we are 4.
And within that, are there big discussions or big differences in opinions that you have to try to work out together?
I mean, very, very big, I would not say. I think we are more or less sometimes in sync, but of course things need to be sorted out. And for example, in this case, when we were migrating, maybe one of us would do something that would solve that problem. But then some days after, we would see, okay, that solved that, but we have this another problem. How can we solve both at the same time? Okay, let's think about a new concept. So a lot of discussion, but healthy discussion. Yeah, of course. And yeah, this is how you do it. And it's always interesting to me once you have a couple of developers, so not only 1, 2, just a bit, working on the same problem, because you have to share the knowledge and you have to be in the day-to-day working in the trenches. So it's nice.
What does the migration process of all that data actually look like to the new tables?
What does it look like? Okay, what can I say about it? Basically, it looks like creating better ways of displaying each type of these objects that I was talking about, and each type of cell, each type of data, like to try to be able to do this in the new table. Then at the same time having a quick way to switch between the two, let's say, and at the same time ensuring that everything doesn't break, let's say, that once we deploy it, like the things don't break, and at least the users have the fallback of the old things. It also is about testing and stress testing. So as I mentioned, we have places where we can have 100,000 of rows, let's say, and we need to test with that. So it cannot be only like the developer on his own computer saying, okay, I have 5 entries, this is good. No, we have to also test it. There were some parts where we also tried to break it, try to see how can we see that if this is working or not.
Do you enjoy stress testing? Do you enjoy trying to break it?
Usually the developers not really, because they are working so hard on the thing that when it's done they say, okay, now it's done. But we like seeing that what we do is robust.
Yeah.
So probably not us, but we like when we have some people testing what we did to make sure that everything is
But
good.
then when they find something, then it's back to the drawing board.
Yeah, I mean, not only depending on the thing, might not be back to the drawing board, but for sure some interesting challenges appear, and I think it's always interesting. Yeah.
You said that in some of these tables there might be a need for, let's say, 100,000. Did you say lines or rows or columns? I can't remember which one.
Rows, yeah.
Yeah,
Columns also.
100,000 rows, and you also said that all of this data is relational.
Mm-hmm.
So that must mean that the complexity here is massive.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. This is always a work in progress. We always try to do it better. But basically, what we have now with this new type of tables that the library already allows, but we also do some things on top of it, is I think you already did some things on websites and all this, no? Mm-hmm. You know more or less what is the DOM, what is the document object model.
Yeah.
So you know that are the lines that compose, like, for example, an HTML file that then the browser will read. So you know that in order to display something, you have to have those nodes. But having those nodes there in the document, they take a lot of space of memory space, let's say. So, for example, one thing that we do that is common nowadays, but is not always simple, is virtualizing. So it means that you might have 100,000 rows. You have those objects in the memory, or not. Maybe in the future we can think about if that is the case. But then what you display in the browser is not the full 100,000. So maybe you only display if you can only see. So if the user is working with 7 rows now, you'll only see the 7 rows now. Then if he scrolls down, then he sees the next one, mm-hmm. and goes like this. And the same thing for the columns. There are tables where we have quite an extensive amount of columns, and if it's not visible, let's say, we can hide it and spare a bit of memory from the browser, let's say. But yeah, it's that part. So that part in terms of visual. In terms of what is not visual, we always try to do the fastest things possible in terms of combination. So if the backend can already calculate some things, that can be an option. Otherwise, if the front end needs to do the combinations and calculate some things, we try to do it as fast as possible and as direct as possible. So there's also a performance challenge there.
Exactly.
It's not only visual. So in the front of a Valispace, due to our complexity, is not only doing some CSS or doing some HTML. It's like there's also some algorithmic complexity.
And does this come into play when you're doing things like filtering or searching?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So the filtering needs to be like, especially with the reactivity we were talking about in the beginning. If you have a table which has 100,000 rows and you have a new row that is coming because some other user created a new row, and your table is filtered, you will know that you will run the algorithm again to understand if that will be filtered or not, if the new row will be presented or not. So this filter needs to be quick. Maybe it needs to be only applied to this new row, so don't run it again if there's no need. If you know that the row was only updated, you don't need to update everything, just update that. So it's always about, it's not only about what we are presenting, what we are seeing, but also about making the correct things to only change what is needed. Otherwise, we will have performance issues because of the size of data we are handling.
It sounds challenging. And
Yes.
It sounds complex. And it's one of those things, isn't it, that no matter how complex the things are that are going on in wherever under the hood, the user just expects it and wants it now. They just want speed.
Yeah, nowadays you can.
Yeah.
Nowadays the user is used to having a lot of to having immediate reaction from the software he's using.
And since you've been here, have you been able to improve that reaction time by any significant degrees? I mean, not just you personally, but within the team. Of course, there's always a collective effort.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, this transition that we were talking about is one way of it, because, for example, in the old tables there were some views, for example, the ones with 10,000 that were taking several seconds to load. We're talking about like more than 10 seconds, and which nowadays probably takes around 2, 3, or even less, depending on what we are talking about. So this is one example, for example. Then there are some things in the day-to-day that we always try to do, like this type of relations or this type of algorithms. We always try to make it better. I'm not sure I can give you a very good example of what I did. One thing that is for sure interesting that I participated indeed recently was in these tables, in these cells. Once you change something, now you have like a progress bar in the bottom. And this is an interesting one because we didn't change like the velocity of it, but we changed the feedback that we give to the user.
Exactly. So the user knows where they are.
Yeah.
It's not vague anymore.
Exactly. Yeah. So this is an interesting thing, which is, yeah, of course you also have to improve the performance, but sometimes it's more about like giving feedback to the user of what is happening. It's like, okay, I deleted something, but you didn't give me any confirmation. Did it delete it? What happened? Is it still doing something? So this is also a way to improve the perception of the user. So one was that is like once the user clicks enter, it gives the feedback. Okay, the backend is processing this. Okay, let's wait a bit or not. Let's continue, but we know that something is happening. So this is also ways that we have to.
Yeah, I think that's very clever. And I remember reading stories about how apps like Uber, they tell you how long or where the progress of the driver is. So you as a user, you feel much calmer, or you're not criticizing the software in some way.
Exactly.
And I wonder how much so you're saying of that small thing that you've implemented, I wonder how much of that is related with UI, UX, and the front end, and where the crossover begins and ends there.
Well, I mean, they are intimately related. Let's say. So besides what we were talking about now in terms of performance, like the algorithmic performance in the background, let's say, in the back end of the front end, but besides that, then everything is UX UI, let's say, and like if we have a button there, if you have a button in the cell, like should the button be there all the time? For example, now we are each row of these tables that we're talking about usually has actions. And they occupy some space. We are every day we have challenges like should the actions be there all the time? Maybe only when the user needs it. When there's something to show, where should it be? Should it appear something in the bottom? So everything that the user see is related with the UX UI. Mm-hmm. And not only the front-end developer needs to have an intuition on this, there's also needs to be like strong collaboration with the UX UI team.
Exactly, and it's only relatively recently that this company has had its own specific UX UI department, right? And I wonder how that's changed your job and your role in some ways.
Yeah, so the idea is that, okay, if you are doing a new feature, it's a small one, and maybe you'll be doing a new button that will do something. You already know that, okay, that button needs to be more or less consistent with the other buttons that are already in application. It needs to behave in a certain way. As a developer, you already have some hint, or you should have some hint that this needs to be like this. So in that sense, because the app was already big, maybe in that sense, it doesn't change a lot. But what does change is in the big picture, maybe, and also in the new features. Because the UX UI team can have like a broader vision of what is coming and how the features relate with each other. And also, if something needs to improve, it needs to improve probably in several places. So they can also give an overview and have the overview, okay, if we change the way the buttons behave like this, or if we change the way we navigate in Valispace, it needs to be consistent throughout the module and consistent throughout the pages, let's see. So let's try to solve it correctly. And then that is the feedback that we like to receive, because that is something that we cannot think about in the day-to-day. Like, we are thinking technically how to implement this feature, how to overcome this obstacle. So if you have already some ideas on how it should look like and how the interaction would look like, is super helpful for us.
Because then it frees you up to have the ability to maybe think through some ideas or problems with more time, rather than having to also think about the nitty-gritties of buttons and whether they should be appearing here or there.
Exactly, which is super important. But yeah, we can focus more on the technical part, let's say.
In fact, let's talk more about that, because I'm interested in thought processes, and especially when it's to do with software engineering and programming. And we've already talked about some fairly complex ideas and challenges, and let's take an example of thinking about ways in the future that you might be able to speed up these filter times or this reactivity. Do you have your own process for trying to think through these fairly abstract topics, or do they come to you like divine moments of inspiration whilst you're in the shower?
That is very difficult to say, but you mean like possible improvements, possible new features, possible.
But maybe on the more grander scale. So instead of being more focused on this one specific task that I have to do next, thinking, okay, how can I think about this whole problem or idea in a much different way? And then whether this is something that comes to you, actually, whether you do think about things on a big scale.
I mean, it would be nice to be able to think on the great. I think it's sometimes difficult. What we do in the front end. So the front end, we meet every week to try to think about these things, and everyone has a chance to say, okay, this is what if we think about this again. So we have these moments to say, okay, this is cool, this is working, but what if we think about it in a different way? And usually once we have this trigger by one of us, then we can think about it. And when we are sleeping and wake up, I mean, there's the cliche thing. Now I remember that you wake up in the middle of the night and you solve the bug in your head. Already happened to me that I write a note saying, okay, that I will solve it. This also happens, but this usually happens once you are more or less thinking on a problem or thinking on something that needs to be improved. So you need to already be in your mind saying, okay, maybe this is not the best way. I was remembering now, you were asking about performance before. I remember another thing that I did was in some of the tables in the beginning, even before this migration, we were like, every time we had new data to show, we would like show everything again or calculate everything again. And one thing at the time I was looking at, I would say, okay, but this doesn't make sense because we know we only have this new thing to show. So one thing I did before the migration was in some tables say, okay, we don't need to calculate all this again. Let's just do this thing, and then we just need to change this. But in that case, it came from a problem itself, no? So because it was taking too long. So okay, it's taking too long. About your question of the grand part of things, that I think is sometimes more difficult, because if you do or work with the same thing every day, maybe it's difficult to see ahead. But this is one of the reasons why we like and we have the Hackathon weeks or the fun weeks, because it allows us to look from another perspective, look to other technologies, because maybe there are other technologies which do things in the front end completely different, and not necessarily we need to change that, but maybe we can incorporate something from there or some ideas from there, or look at, for example, open source code that is solving challenge close to ours or in a similar way to ours, and we can see how did they do it. So I think you need some of this inspiration and see how challenges are solved in different ways. And once you have this inspiration, you can say, that was cool. Then the other day you wake up and say, what if we do this in Valispace? So it's a bit like this. Thinking on the great spectrum is difficult, but when you get other outputs.
So it's a mixture between, let's say, inspiration, dedication to the problem, and allowing things to rise up, waking up in the middle of the night, as you said, and making notes, and just a combination. Another one of the biggest features of Valispace is the calculation engine, and allowing engineers as they're designing their product, allowing these often crazy big calculations to happen in the background, okay? And because you come in some ways from a hardware engineering background because you worked for Edisoft, you know,
we're still software, but
yes, but you worked in maybe parallel alongside.
There were some people there, yeah, true, but yes.
I think maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I imagine that within, let's say, hardware engineers, there's different standards for different formulas that people are using. In a way, how on the front end do you standardize these formulas to make sure that users are using the same things that they're used to, the same symbols that they're used to?
Yeah, basically, right now, what we are showing, let's say, or the user is able to interact is with LaTeX, which is more or less is like some kind of web representation of LaTeX, let's say, which is I don't know if you know it about, but it's like a kind of more or less programming language, let's say, not necessarily, but.
How do you spell it?
LaTeX is like latex actually, but you read LaTeX.
Okay.
So you spell LaTeX. Yeah. But basically this is some very common thing that is used to write academic papers, for example, or to write dissertations or theses. So this is a very common tool, let's say. And besides that, that tool also has like a math module, which lets you draw complex things like, for example, the sum sign, the integration sign, this type of more difficult mathematical things. And what Valispace did was to give something very close to that to the users. So the user right now, what they can do is when they are editing a formula, they will see like if they do like if you want to do a power, you will do the symbol for the power, but then we are in the front end showing it in a way that it makes sense for the user. So in this LaTeX type of way. So in that sense, it's only one representation, but what the user writes there is completely free. And yeah, this is one of the things in the future we will enhance.
But describe that to me a bit more, just so I can understand. So the user, you say, is completely free?
Of what he writes in the formula, yes. And what we try to do is, as I said, there are some symbols, for example, square root or the power. We try to, based on what he types and what he wants to reach to, represent that in a way that he is used to. So if you go to a normal editor in the web, for example, and you try to do like, for example, the power symbol, you don't have it, you have the multiplication, okay. Then we can do things like, okay, if you have two multiplications, then we show the power, for example, which is always, again, the UX UI, always trying to be as close to the user environment as possible, while giving the freedom for him to, okay, because then becomes the challenge. Now, if you press delete, what will happen? What will it delete? If you put a square root, the square root is a symbol that should have other symbols inside. If you press delete, what will happen now?
Yeah,
You know,
are you
so it's
deleting the square root symbol, or are you going to delete the numbers inside of it?
exactly this type of things. So
Yeah.
it's not an easy challenge once you start into it. And our current this is also something that is not completely solved in Valispace. Our current math editor is good, but it's not. It still has a long way that we can improve, and we are actually improving it right now, and doing it in a different kind of technology that allows us more freedom of what we do. But by doing that, we are also doing a bit more by ourselves, let's say, and we go to those decisions like every day. It's like, okay, you move the arrows to the next cursor. What should be the cursor? Like, because once you have multiplications, then you have divisions. Where should it go? So it's not a simple thing. But regardless of the challenges, what we always aim for is for the user to understand what is happening and to be closer to what he's expecting.
It sounds like that you are constantly living in edge cases.
Yes.
Do you often feel like this?
Exactly. Yes, in a lot of things, it's like this. But I think that is where the value comes from, because I was talking about LaTeX. Nowadays you have some editors online which allows you to write LaTeX and see immediately the preview. If you go and see how a formula is done there, you have a lot of commands, and you have commands inside commands, and quickly you are reading almost like a programming language. So that is okay, it could work, but it's not helpful for probably the users. They want to be something, they want to write the characters they want, the operations they want. So I think that is where also comes in the value of Valispace, that they are more easily able to write that without thinking about how to do this, without needing to learn another tool, while giving the full possibility and the full expression of those tools.
How do you ensure then that you talked about trying to give something that the user is used to, the way that they're used to expressing it? How do you ensure that is what they're used to? Is that just through, let's say, UX UI surveys and customer feedback, or often watching how they do things?
Yeah, it needs to be like that. Now in Valispace, because Valispace already has some years, and these formulas and these type of features is something that was base of the software from the beginning. Because of that, we already have some experience or some knowledge of what the users are expecting, let's say. So we always need to build upon that knowledge, because it's a very core thing of Valispace. But then is exactly what you described. So I was mentioning right now that we are improving this formula editor, and we are doing this. We are doing interviews. We are making members of the team of different teams of Valispace interacting with it, saying what they are expecting to happen, what is not happening. Customer surveys, these type of things. Probably the same thing as we did with the tables, where we will have both versions of the editor, where if the user, no, I don't like this, let me go to the old way, he still has that opportunity. But then, of course, we need to understand why and improve in the new one. But it's a bit like this, and is a core feature of Valispace, so we need to.
From what you're describing, it sounds like there's a need to often always think about the end user, which is a hardware engineer. Do you think that it's important for a potential future developer at Valispace to have experience of hardware engineering?
I mean, I think it would always be nice, but I think we cannot count on it, let's say. Because I think it's not a common profile, let's say, or not as common. And so I think it's always nice in terms of hardware engineering, or in terms of integration of big complex products, is always nice if the developer has that. But I think it cannot be like a demanding thing that we want from our developers. What we need to have is very good product teams and customer-facing teams that are able to extract that and able to show to the developers and to demonstrate to developers what the users are expecting and how do they work, because it's a different it's different profiles and different knowledge. So I think the developers, what they need to have is a very customer or user-based logic or philosophy, let's say. But yeah, it's very difficult for them to be expecting to know the workflows of our clients, especially because we also have several industries. So yeah, I think what's most important, especially for the front end, is to have user-oriented
So you're looking for people with empathy?
With empathy, yes. And yeah, exactly. With empathy and to know about these UX, UI things, to know about how to make a workflow faster. Yeah.
Why do you think that programmers would enjoy working here in Portugal?
In Portugal? I mean, I'm Portuguese, so this is a sentence that is a question that is tricky. Yeah, I think, for example, I mean, right now we have some sun, there are some clouds, but we have some sun. I think for me, this is what's one of the most cooler things, that is the weather and what you can do with it. So we have a lot of colleagues that are surfing, a lot of colleagues that are into sports and outdoor sports, and from climbing and all this. And I think Portugal is a very good place to do that. And I mean, every day waking up with sun, or most every day, is always a good motive.
As someone that's come here from the UK, I have to completely agree. It's a game changer. And you can see here we've got some Portuguese sweets.
Exactly.
Which one of these is your favourite, would you say?
So from these,
I wouldn't say that this one at the back is a Portuguese sweet.
This one? Yeah, maybe not.
No.
Maybe not. But this one, I think it's a queijada, and I think is a very good one.
Well, João said the same thing, so maybe it's something that's consistent with
the Portuguese feeling.
With programmers. Maybe if you went outside of this small plate of delicious Portuguese treats, what do you think is your favourite?
I think everything in Portugal that related with eggs, so like ovos moles, like encharcada, all these types of things with eggs, it's amazing. Also from Alentejo, a favorite one of mine, siricaia, is also good.
Describe that to me.
That one is a kind of pie, let's say, but a thin one with cinnamon on top that goes to the oven, is a bit toasted. But then the trick is that you put like a plum, but a very special plum that is like in sugar. Like I don't know how to say it in English. Then you just put it on top with the sugar that comes with that, like with a calda. In Portuguese we say a calda.
Okay.
And then you just go the pie with this, and it's amazing.
I'm salivating.
Exactly, it's amazing. We need to have it one day. I was remembering now that just regarding the Portuguese question, there was also like a booming software industry that was very noticeable in the meetups, for example. Before COVID, I used to go to several meetups, tech meetups, for example, JavaScript, and it was very nice to see like people, different companies, different backgrounds, so Italians, Finland, a lot of things, and sharing knowledge. And I think this was becoming, together with the weather, it was becoming a very cool thing. And I think that now we will start again. I already received some emails or some meetups that will start being physical again. And I think you will see that the tech scene in Lisbon is starting to take shape.
Super nice. So would you say that there's a growing or established and growing tech community here already? Yeah,
exactly.
Cool.
So it's always exciting to learn.
Absolutely. And I guess it is really helpful from a knowledge sharing perspective, and it just makes it exciting to see where the future of Portuguese and Lisbon tech will go, I think. Okay, Rui, I have one final question for you. I've really enjoyed this conversation, by the way. But
Me too.
How do you switch off?
Okay, that is a tricky one. Yeah, I mean, like the easiest thing to me to switch off is a beer with friends. So basically that is that.
I've shared one of them with you.
Exactly. at least one. No, but yeah, I think that is the easiest. Coming together with friends at the end of a week, if it's hard or if it's a good one, is always the perfect way to start the week and then to shut a bit off. You always, either myself, some other friends, you always have something to say. This week something happened. It should not be like this. Or you always have something to say. But then once you said it, you have a beer, you have your friends, everything is good. You have the weather in Lisbon, and you are able to switch a bit off.
Yeah, I think it's a really good answer, and I think I completely agree with that. Okay, thanks, Rui.
Thank you very much.
I'll see you upstairs.
Okay, yeah, see you there.
Bye bye.
Thank you very much.
Cool.